Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on starting a partner education program. Thank you for bearing with us 2 seconds ago when this was not saying that we were live. But welcome. My name is Shannon Howard. I'm the Director of Customer and Content Marketing at Intellum. It's my pleasure every month to host different webinar series to help you learn and grow in your career. This series is specifically around how do we scale partner success. If you have different types of partners that support your business, how do we support them at scale through education and training? And so today we're going to be talking about what does it look like to start a partner education program from scratch. I'm going to introduce you in a moment to my friend Katie here, who started the partner education and training program at alarm.com and then grew that program to 35 team members. So it comes with a wealth of experience. She's going to share with you a little bit about her story. And we're going to have more of a conversation around how she started and grew that program. And before we dive in, just some quick housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. So if you want to come back, you want to share it with somebody, you need to jump off halfway. We're all good there. You'll receive an email after the webinar ends and you'll come back to the page that you're on to watch the recording. There's a Q&A box underneath the video. So as we're going, we'd love to hear from you. Consider that a chat box too. We can see all the messages that you send through. So if you have questions for Katie as we're going, or if you just want to say hello and let us know that you're here today, we would love to hear from you. And then the final thing is also underneath this video, you'll find a place where you can share your feedback and rate this session. So that's helpful for us to understand, what do you like? What do you want to hear more about? We read all of your responses, so please take a moment to do that as well. And so Katie, I'm going to kick it over to you, let you introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll get our conversation started.
Sounds good. Thank you. So hi, everyone. I'm Katie. Just a little bit about me. So I am in Northport, New York, which probably nobody knows where that is. So that is on Long Island, little piece of land about an hour outside of New York City. I live here with my husband, my 5-year-old daughter, and my 19-year-old cat. I know there's always a lot of cat lovers on here, so to make sure that we pointed out the cat. I'm a novice power lifter, got into that about a year ago. So out there lifting some heavy weights, aspiring tomato farmer. I have lots of heirloom tomatoes. I love getting out there in the dirt and growing my own vegetables. It's just so rewarding. We love spending lots of time at the beach. This is a little beach town, which is awesome, but spend lots of time still in the city, hanging out with some friends and family. We love to cook and eat specifically. I once won an award for being the most optimistic, and I love to tell people that because I feel like it gives a lot of insight into my personality, who I am, and what I'm doing over here. And then just lastly, I've been in learning and development since 2007, which I literally cannot believe. Feels like that's like a lifetime. It's crazy, but I've been in every type of learning and development that you can be in. I've done a lot of internal training, consultants, support, sales, basically everyone, manager, leadership training. And then most recently, I spent the bulk of my time at alarm.com building out this partner education and training program that I'm going to talk about today. And, that was the most amazing experience. I was the first training hire, built the team up, to 35, sort of at our height. And it was just an incredible opportunity to, blank slate, build, what are we going to do? How are we going to build this? And over time built it to have, a very robust online offering. We did certification. We ended up monetizing. We had in-person training. We were traveling all over the place, offering this to our partners. So, today I'm really excited to talk about it. I feel like, there's not a lot of people that do partner education. So hopefully today I can help out, bring some light to the topic, and give you some of the tips and the things that I worked on over the years.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time to introduce yourself, because I think a lot of folks, some people tuning in are in the partner education, training, enablement world, but a lot of folks are being asked to do something that they've never done before. And I know that was part of your story. So maybe set the stage for us a little bit. In your most recent role, you're at alarm.com, starting a partner education function. What types of partners did alarm.com have, and what was the impact of partners on the business? Why was that an important part of their strategy?
Yeah, it's really important to think about what type of partners, because there can be so many different types of partners. I didn't even know what that was when I started. Like I said, I was mostly internal. So I was like, what does this even mean? But basically, Alarm.com is a technology company, and the business model is B2B2C. So different than a lot of other, SaaS businesses. So their primary go-to-market strategy is through partners. So it's not necessarily like, you're in a B2B and then over here we're trying another way to, grow the business. This was the way that we were going to market. So it makes it even more important and more relevant to make sure that you have training and enablement to support those partners. And so our position was really, how can we ensure that our partners were able to sell the product, support the product, install it, because we were both SaaS and hardware. And so I sort of felt like we were their go-to-market team, right? All of the things that they needed to be successful were coming from, my team. We also had other partner services organizations in the business that were supporting them in all of those ways too.
So you mentioned you were the first person for training in general and then for partner training. So you're kind of tasked with training partners. Where do you start? How do you figure out, you have all these different types of partners. How do you figure out what they need or where to get started?
Yeah, it was a big task trying to figure it out, and very quickly realized that there's thousands and thousands of partners. So it wasn't just, oh, here's one type of partner that you're going to learn about, and then you're going to learn everything about them, and you're going to do that training. It wasn't at all like that. So, I had to figure out, how important are these partners? How do they generate revenue for their business? How are we going to work with them? So the first thing that I did was sitting down with stakeholders across the business. So we were sitting in marketing at the time. I reported to the head of marketing. It was part of that strategy, but meeting with marketing, who are the partners that you're working with? Why are they successful? Who are the ones that are struggling? Do we have a partner program, which I found out I didn't really even know what that was. So we had a tiered structure for what our partners look like. So I had a lot of these conversations across the whole business. Sales, obviously critically important to talk to. They're working with them every single day. So I went out, I shadowed a lot of, events, got into the field. I spoke directly to the partners, said, what do you need? Like, what are you guys trying to do? And really just gathering a lot of information. I also worked with our support leader and said, why are people calling in? Can I look at tickets? Can I sort of get a better understanding of what is missing here, right? And so just getting that like really broad perspective across the business of who we're working with, what our partners teams look like. But like I said, like so diverse. We had partners that were, mom and pop sort of businesses getting out there trying to figure out how to change their business to be smart home. And then we had partners that were bigger than us, thousands and thousands of employees with their own training teams. So, the need for what we needed to supply to people was so drastically different. So sitting down and trying to put that together was quite a task.
I can imagine, but it also sounds like you leaned on, I would have like a lot of your learning and development background of going around and assessing what are the needs, what information already exists. And I think that's something that's helpful for people to take their existing skill set, apply it in a new context.
Yes, 100%. I talk about that all the time. If you can make a program, it's like ask the right questions, talk to everybody that's involved that has that insight and that deep knowledge level, and you'll be successful. That's like step one. In this program over time, we changed the program. We iterated so many times based on like, how is the business changing? What are the new objectives? And so, every time we brought on a new partner, they could have been in a different industry. They had a different focus. So we were constantly had to be on our toes, asking more and more questions so that we could evaluate, what we were offering. And then later on, when the business, we got a little bit more sophisticated, the measurement tools, we could actually look at how are people performing and understand even more what our partners needed.
So that kind of leads into our next question around, there's a lot of different types of partners, right? So you mentioned there's different types of partners, there's different tiers of partners, there's different needs that I'm sure that you uncovered. How do you prioritize what to create or where to get started with all of that? So you're doing this stakeholder, information gathering, and now you have all this input. How do you stack rank all those different priorities?
Yeah, not easy. And when I first started, I literally wanted to just like do everything. I was like, how do we create this and this and this and just jump in? But, we really needed to think, where can we focus? Where are we going to get the most bang for our buck, right? Like we're trying to make money. We're trying to support the partners in the best way that we can. So, a lot of the feedback from sales and marketing is like, all right, we need to focus this on where we think we're going to get a lot of lift, the people that we're, really counting on to sell a lot. Like, let's dig into these different areas. So, we looked at who are the most productive or the ones we're going to get the most out of. So we looked at our PPP program, which was the Premier Partner Program, and trying to figure out what we could do there to support those guys. That's like a big chunk also. So that was a good starting point. And so a lot of our marketing and everything we were putting together, we were trying to focus on that group. The next part of how do we organize the content was when I first started 12 years ago, nobody knew what a smart home was. So a lot of that initial content, really, we needed to focus on changing behavior, influencing our partners to understand why they should sell smart home. Like, why is that going to be good for them, and how do they do that? So there was a lot of business transformation that some of these partners had to go through, and that's what we were really leaning into initially. As the business progresses and the market changes, we changed our content. So we went from why is this important? What are we doing? How do you get involved and how do you sell it? To, okay, we're really going to partner with support, get a lot more technical, get really focused on now you're going to have to go out and install this with our customers. So now we're going to teach you all the details on exactly how to do that. So we sort of staged it out, and that even continued on. It's like, great, now you know how to do all that. So how do we focus on customer experience? How do we focus on adding on services, right? So there's this progression, but it's very much based on the business goals and the needs of the partners, right? So sort of meshing those together. And then I would say the third part of that is how are you going to deliver this content based on what your partner network sort of looks like? And for us, it was they're everywhere. They're distributed across all of North America, right? So really leaning in heavily to how do we build out online learning, right? Because we did travel extensively because that was part of the culture that is in that industry. So we were, 2 times a month for multiple days training in person, getting more hands-on, but that online offering was also critically important. So we started digging into that right away and, built out hundreds of courses over the span of being there.
Wow. It's interesting you're talking about not just the technical, because I think often we're like, oh, well, let me teach you how to implement, service, support this product. But you're also talking about the behavior change, not just for the customer, but also for the partner of what's a smart home, right? And so part of this is whether we're doing category creation or we're just trying to change the narrative in a space, our partners have to be along for that ride. And so how are we helping with that as well?
Yeah, exactly. 100%. That was a big shift. It was, home security, and now it's smart home, it's a whole different world out there. And we were, partnering with them to help them make that change. So it was really important.
That's awesome. All right. We have a slide for this next question. So we wanted to talk about what are parts of a partner education program. So we're starting from scratch, right? We're assessing the business needs, the partner needs, stakeholder needs. We're gathering all that information. We're prioritizing. What are the key elements? And you've defined them here, but you're going to talk to them. So this is a good slide to screenshot. What goes into an effective partner education program?
Yeah, I'm going to tell everybody on the call, this is 6 things that are important. There's a lot of things that are important. These are the things that I did that could be useful to you, but definitely not the end all be all here. So number 1, partner education program, goals and impact. What are we trying to do? What impact are we trying to drive? This isn't really different from a lot of other learning programs that you want to try to, put together, but it's almost more important because you are partnering with the business, right? So it's what are the business goals? And then how is this team going to come in and execute to make an impact? What problems are we trying to solve is the other question. I would get together with my team every time we're trying to build something, trying to figure out what to do. It's what are the problems and how are we going to solve them for our partners and internally, how are we going to get that going? So you have to start with your goals and what you're actually trying to do. can't just jump in and, start cranking out content for things that you think are going to work. Like, you really need to be organized and structured, because later on, I'm going to talk about the next one, you have to go and talk to everybody about what you're trying to do so that you can get that buy-in and build credibility and visibility for your program. So the next one is alignment and communication. So this is so important. Like I said, I started in marketing, working with everyone in that group so closely hand in hand with the sales organization, and then later the support group. I mean, and even product, we were all super in sync to make sure that we were going to market together, right? Like, you can't just have one group over here trying to do something and we're sitting over here and trying to make education. So really figuring out how we can align, what are the goals for the marketing team? What are the goals in support, and how can we contribute to them, and making sure that we're all talking about what it means to have this effective program, how we're going to measure it together, and stay connected, right? So, are we going to have weekly meetings? Are we going to provide reporting? So when I first started, I used to put together this insane report by hand. And I would send it to all of the leadership, anyone in an external role. I mean, I think I sent it to even more people than that, because I wanted everyone to see, here's all the work that the team is doing to move forward on these goals. And that opened a lot of doors of communication for people to ask questions, to send ideas, to really continue to evolve and just make sure that we're all working towards the same thing. Number 3, hire great people. So I did not do this alone. I started, and then I very quickly was like, I really need to hire a great group of people to help support this. I had a vision. I was ready to rock and roll, but I needed a lot more people to help me build this out. Was super fortunate to have the most amazing team. Shout out to all those people. What I looked for early on was like, I need people that want to build, that are excited about this sort of blank slate. We're all going to be in it together. So lots of, I don't want to say generalists, but sort of people with a lot of different skill sets that could really help out with operations. They could be content builders, excellent in front of a classroom. So those were sort of my first hires. I do remember hiring someone that was very specifically helping me build online content from the beginning, because I had no expertise there. So I was like, I definitely need that person. And we put on here, be a butterfly, which is what I told everyone on my team when they started, was that something so important is, we're in this team together. We have a lot of goals. We're going to do a lot of work, but also you need to get up from your desk. And now people don't have desks. We're all virtual, but, go visit all these people in these different groups, like socialize what we're doing. Tell everybody what you're working on. Ask them what they're doing, because you never know like how you're going to build a new connection, receive new information that's really going to help bind us into this strategy, help us figure out what we're doing next. But all of these connections and building visibility with the team is critical to the success of this type of program. If you were at alarm.com, everybody knew what the academy was, how it worked. That was integrated into the business, and the team was always involved with joining sales calls and the marketing team and having lunches with people. And that's just, what the culture was.
I like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, like, I'd like that the first 3 things here are, we haven't even gotten to like, what did you create for people? Because I think it's so easy to jump right to like, well, let's create some content and some training that's going to help people solve some problems. But it's really, what are the goals? Like, what's the impact that we're trying to make? What's the problem we're trying to solve? How are we aligning and communicating across teams? Because especially, I know we talked about this as we were preparing for the webinar of, do people know what you're doing? Because in the early days, you are doing manual reporting and you are kind of like, some of your metrics are softer or less tangible. And I know we're going to talk more. There's some questions coming in about metrics. So we're getting there. We're going to get there. But so much of it is like, how are you communicating to the business? And then the hiring great people and being a butterfly. Yeah. I've heard that from so many people, is that the early hires were people who could go represent education to the business. So yes, you have a technical skill set, but you're also representing education to the business, because part of standing the program up is getting buy-in and maintaining buy-in for the program itself.
Yeah, 100%. I was going to say something. Now I lost I lost that point, but I'll just move on to the next one. Oh, I know. I was going to say, early days of starting this too is like nobody's used to having this function because it's brand new. And so, the sales team is like training. This is what I think training is. I think it's a presentation. And it's like, let's have that conversation. Let's figure out what does training, mean to you? What does that look like? What are we going to build that is meaningful to you? If you think it's just presentations, then like, let's have that conversation and figure out what we're trying to do. Are we going to influence behavior? Are we building awareness? Are we teaching a technical skill, right? So there's a lot of different ways, and you're never going to get there unless you're talking to all of these people and really figuring out what you want to build, which sort of goes into like, what's your content strategy?
Yeah, get into it. Learning and content strategy.
Yes. So, learning and content strategy, first of all, have one. So know what you actually want to be doing, right? Because you can really get sidetracked. There's so many different ways that you could approach this. But I always think about it as like the content. Are you building the right content at the right time, delivering it in the right way? So like those are like the three sort of pillars I look at. And know where you want to focus and where you're going to get the biggest impact. So like I said before, I really wanted to build like a holistic, like we're going to start with onboarding. We're going to just like make sure everyone can get onboarded, do all the content for everybody. And that's what it's going to be. But what I really needed to focus on was building content where we're going to get the most lift from these partners. So it's like, okay, well, the sales team just brought on this partner. We know that they have so many customers. We really need to build content that's going to be good for that group. And so you just have to figure that out. And, the right time is, what point of that learning process are we at? Do we need to figure out if it's going to be online? Is it going to be in person, right? So there's a lot of different parts of the strategy. I think another topic that probably comes up frequently with learning and content strategy is all around certification. Should we have a certification? And then what is that going to look like, right? So you start thinking about all of those different options. We did do certification. We had 2 of those. It was a big ask from our executive team. And then over time, that sort of evolves and changes. So you're always going back and reevaluating where you are as a business and how does the learning program support those goals. Number 5, so enablement tools and operation. I'm a huge operations and systems person, looking at what our tech stack should be. We started with just having an LMS. That was a big deal, implementing that. And then from there, adding on different content authoring tools and how do we integrate into the CRM. And we had the knowledge base team for a certain amount of time. And really, I like to take just like a holistic view. How can we use all these? How can they talk to each other? Make it as easy as possible. And then for us, because this is partner, we had a partner tools team where they would build tools for the partners. And then it's the conversation of, well, how can we integrate with those tools? Thinking more around performance support and really integrating learning into the flow of business is really important. But you really need to have enablement and operations locked up. Obviously, this changes over time. In the beginning, things were a little loosey-goosey, and then you start sort of, okay, we really need to have a process for this. We really need to integrate a new system. How do they all talk to each other? And so, I had a whole team of people that were specifically focused on learning innovation, operations, making sure that we were using all the latest and greatest. Again, it's a process. We started with just an LMS, and then you sort of build from there. And then the last one I'll talk about here is just partner feedback is everything. So how do you get feedback from your partners? It could be surveys. It's talking to them in real life at conferences, at trainings, and then bringing that feedback back into the business and sharing it with everybody. Like I said, we're talking, we're communicating, there's reporting and saying like, this is what partners are asking for. This is the feedback they're giving us. Oh, they really don't like this thing that we're working on. So do we change it? Do we scrap it? How do we iterate on that? But I think that feedback really helps drive the strategy. A lot of customer education, they do like customer advisory. We had implemented a partner advisory sort of group, same thing. We would bring products and show them and say like, what do you think about these things? They would give us feedback before we even launched it, so that we could really help craft what we were trying to do in the best possible way. So sharing that feedback, talking to them, staying in connection and communication with them is absolutely critical to the success of what you're doing.
I think that's a common thread. We heard that last month. Kevin was talking about setting partners up for success and saying kind of co-creating and collaborating with your partner network in a lot of this, and I think we talked about this too, is reminds me of how product managers work, about treating education as a product. We're starting with goals and business problems to solve, and we're creating alignment across teams and stakeholders, and we're thinking about the strategy and the tech stack and integration and how are we going to measure these things, and then we're consulting with our customer, our end stakeholder, so in this case partners, to understand what do you think, what do you like, is this confusing, is this, does this make sense to you, is there something else that you want to see from us? And so it's like a collaborative process.
100%. And like, because our partners were so different, right? So something could be really good for the smaller partners, and then really like the larger partners didn't care about that, right? So we really needed to figure out how we were going to market our educational products to this group, how are we going to cater to that group. So getting that feedback was important. And, as I mentioned, the partners are all different, not just big and small, but some had completely different focuses than others. And so, it just brings a lot of color into the picture of how we're going to develop something.
Well, I'm going to stop sharing the slides here. We'll go back to this to talk about, so you mentioned collaboration with other teams, and you also mentioned kind of the sales team, and they're thinking about training, and it's like, what is training? Like, what does that mean to you? Yeah. And so you're trying to educate your company on what is this function, right? And so often I think education, customer education, partner education, learning and development, when you're in it, you get it, but the rest of business does not, right? And so how are we teaching other teams what our value is and what we do and how it's valuable to the business? Can you talk a little bit about how did you build those relationships with other teams, collaborate with them, get and maintain buy-in? Because I know that was a big part of the success of your program, especially early on.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I was initially on the marketing team. I don't know if that's unusual or not, but we started there. And so built really amazing relationships with all the people in marketing, because marketing and education are so similar, right? Especially back then, because we're really, trying to get the partners to understand the value and who we are and what we're doing. So that was a really natural sort of connection that we had there. And it was also a lot of like advocacy work. Like, how do we get them to be fans of us, right? And so we worked really well together. It's funny because getting people to understand what we do, I actually had in the early days, it was just me. I would go and say like, hey, product managers, like, would you be willing to be a trainer in my program right now? Because I don't know anything about these products and we really need to teach people how to do this, right? So I worked so closely with our product team, and we would have the subject matter experts for each of these different products. And I would sit down with them and say, like, this is what we're trying to do. Here's some content I put together. Let's collaborate on building out something that you think makes sense. We were small companies, like 175 people, so we were all together in this, 2 floors kind of thing. And so they would come in and they would actually do the training. And so I started doing internal training where I was like, listen, we're going to do train the trainer. We're going to get everybody up to speed on what it means to do training. And it was a really wonderful collaboration. And then the same thing with our support group, sort of a little bit later on, we got really technical, and they came in and everyone started really understanding the value and spreading sort of the word about, what is training? What does this look like? Because they were so involved in it that they bought in, they were doing the work, they saw the value, they could, talk to the partners and see, what difference and impact they were making right away. So I think getting people involved in the program really helped a lot. And then like sort of the regular stuff, I was always, going to the sales meetings, and sometimes we would travel together and we would go to different meetings. And so I would just try to insert myself as much as possible into these different meetings and coming up with ideas and ways that I could help solve other problems for them. But because there was so much like, can you come and like work with me on this? We're gonna be partners. I think that really helped over time, like integrate what education, what training meant in the business.
That makes sense. I've often thought of education as like an influential, right? You're leaning a lot on influence of, hey, I need that subject matter expertise, and I need you to understand, or I need you to direct people to training. And so much of it is not, we don't have direct authority over what other people do. And so we're building those relationships to have influence to say, hey, would you mind? Like, can I show
Yeah.
you this thing? And I love that you're looking for ways, because it's like the give and get. You're looking for ways to add value to other teams. And then when you're asking for, can you come and help with this training? Can you help with this thing? There's, I would imagine, more receptivity to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the product managers were, so excited to talk to the partners and gather information and be able to talk about their products. They made them, they want to get out there, and they had goals of their own. And so it really was just a great relationship that we had. I mean, over time, obviously the product managers sort of stepped back and we had our own trainers, but they were still a super important part of content development, and they really understood what it meant after that. So like, you start with it, and then over time, now you have this new culture and people understand it. So it's really helpful.
That's awesome. All right. Pivot to metrics. And this is always, I think this is always a question for people, is around how do you measure the success of your program? How do you communicate that in those early days when you're establishing something and maybe you don't have, right? You mentioned this lengthy report pack that you're putting together. How do you start to show and communicate the value to the business? And then, what are you measuring in those early days?
Yeah. So in the early days, I mean, we didn't have a whole lot, honestly. Like, you're just trying to start something up. And so, and we just weren't that sophisticated with our reporting in general. Like, in our BI team was very small, right? So, and I mean, probably a lot of people know this. Like, when you're in learning, like, usually you get like pushed to the end of the list here because the company is trying to scale and grow and do all these amazing things. So like, my report is usually at the bottom of the list. But in the early days, a lot of what we looked at was the basics of learning engagement, learning adoption. So it's like, are people using the stuff that we're creating? And how do we look at that? We look at our LMS numbers. We look at how many people are attending our events. We would, constantly be tracking if people were getting certified and what that looked like. And those were some of those like really early metrics. It was basic. We had some CSATs, and, we would be looking at survey information again, just like trying to get feedback. But the report that I was putting together, I felt like we were pulling just like a lot of LMS data and in-person data to show people are doing it, which means they must think that's going to be helpful for them, right? Like, they're adopting it. And then also thinking like, are people coming back and doing it again? So they did it once, they came and saw one course. That's okay, but we're a technology company. We have a million things. We're constantly producing. So then I would be looking for, are they coming back? So we have new, and then we have returning. So that's something really important. Also, one of our really early metrics that we used a lot was like a referral rating. So you came to a training, would you refer this? Would you tell your friend, your colleague, someone else in the industry that they should come to this training because it's valuable? So that was a really important metric that we looked at early on. If we just stay like in that early on phase, I think that you also think about things like, are we successfully integrated into the business? So like, did we set ourselves up to be a strategic partner where, what you said, people know what we do, they understand the value, and we're part of their processes. So the sales team, for example, when they get on the call with a partner and they're either onboarding them or they're talking to them about picking up a new product to sell, are they talking about the academy? Are they talking about partner education? How that's going to help them out? So, there's other ways I think that you can say we're successful if you don't have all the metrics available. And then over, the course of 12 years, I mean, we started going much more into business outcomes. Right now we have more data. We have a reporting team. We have people that are going, you know what? This team, they're doing a lot of stuff. we should start looking at that like a little bit more, a little deeper, right? So then we start thinking, how can this team really influence support? So are we going to decrease the support interactions? Can we look at how this team is going to influence product adoption or product launch, like things like that? Sales increase, platform engagement. I mean, on and on and on. These are all some of the metrics that probably a lot of people on this call hear often. Those are those business metrics. So you start with sort of that bare bones, like learning, how we integrated into the business. Do people care about us? And then, you can get more sophisticated over time. Hopefully you're already aligned with the business and what you want to do. And then, you can start building out how to pull these specific relationships to support sales, etc.
So Frida actually had a question kind of on this around often in enablement, metrics are focused on certifications and the number of trained users, partners. And so you have those, and you talked about those, right? Engagement level metrics. We're able to say people are doing this, they're coming back, they're doing these things. How did you then start to tie that toward business outcomes, or how did you tell the story too, right? Because sometimes it takes time, right? Depending on like how long partner ramp time is, or how quickly people grow their book of business, right? We can't always measure those things right away, whether it's because it takes time or because of those integrations that you were talking about, making sure that all these systems are talking to each other. How did you start to prove that out?
Great question. So, I think we could talk about like something like certification or technical training was probably like the easiest one for us to build a story around. So, if someone gets certified, what's in that certification? So we can sort of dissect, or hopefully when you're creating certification, specifically what those objectives are. What do we want them to be able to do? What are we driving, which behaviors, et cetera. So for us, it's like we want to decrease support calls. And what that meant was, we were teaching them very technical things. And so I got together with our, BI team. Essentially, we would review the objectives. We would look at what we were trying to get them to do. And then we would look at our support tickets and, why are people calling in? What are those specific things? So we could say, okay, well, here's video. We were talking about video cameras. Okay, let's look over here. And we started to draw these connections between more specific details. Sorry, my cat is jumping up here. Told you she would make an appearance. But, we tried to just be specific with what the objectives were and then what this looked like on this side. I mean, it wasn't a perfect connection. Like, we're looking at correlations, we're looking at the best that we can do. But the best thing I can say is that, like, just try to be intentional and specific about what your objectives are in a certification or whatever, and then trying to pull those across into some of those other business metrics so that you can tell that story. It's like, great, someone got certified in all these technical components, and now when we look at support, they're not calling in for XYZ. We train them on that. That's a good picture that you can tell someone. I mean, for us, like, our support costs, or support calls, I should say, like, drastically went down when people were involved in things like certification and taking a certain number of courses. So we were able to tell that story. I think also B2B to C is a little bit more complicated to see how we're successful with some of those. But in a B2B, I would assume it would be a little bit easier because you have a lot of that data sort of at your fingertips. We don't have all of that information in that business model.
Yeah, it reminds me of kind of doing the best you can with the information that you have at any given point in time, right? That we can't sit on our hands and say, I'm sorry, I only have access to my LMS data, right? But how can we get creative with that?
Yeah.
How I think you said something in our prep call, I took a note here, that being silent will work against you.
Oh, yeah.
That was so good, to be communicating. Even if you can't draw those hard connections, because I do think the narrative in our space is very much like, you've got to prove ROI. And it's like, yes. And it takes anyone time to get there. It takes
100%. Yeah. I mean, I'm a talker. I love to talk, and I love to talk about the team and all the success and the programs and stuff. And I think getting out there and talking and trying to piece together the story and talk about the enablement engine and, how are we going to do this? And like really getting stakeholders involved in that conversation, even if you don't have every single data point yet, it's like, how can we get it? How can we work together to prove that this stuff is working? Also like partners would give us feedback where they would say, like, we integrated your certification into our business and we're hanging up all the certifications and they have to do this before they can go out into the field, or, I mean, that's huge. That's, even if I can't pull the data, I'm going to go, well, these partners are like so invested in this and they're adopting our stuff so seriously that it's like impacting how they're doing work now, right? Like you have to go through these programs. That's worth a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like those stories are really important to make sure that we're bringing back and we're sharing them as data points.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about the qualitative, not just the quantitative.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot to be told.
Sure. All right. Mary had a question. She said, I work at a remote company, oversee customer education for SaaS customers around the world. We've been tasked with creating a partner training program this year, but my team is small. What advice do you have for small teams juggling creating and maintaining product training for a large customer base while building a partner training program from the ground up? Yeah.
Wow, that was a lot of questions in one. I'm like, wait, can I read that again? Is that in here or somewhere?
It is. Yeah. Toward the
Oh,
bottom.
okay.
Yeah, I think the main question here is what advice do you have for small teams? So it sounds like they're starting partner training, but they're also already tasked with customer education. So how do they maximize their time and efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think a few things. One, I mean, if you already have like a ton of content that's already created for customer, I would probably think about, is any of this stuff relevant for partners? So from a content strategy standpoint, I mean, ask a lot of questions and try to figure out what your partners need. But if you can borrow content, I mean, that's something huge. We did that. We would say this is good for internal and it's good for partners. It might be also good for customers. So maybe you can use some of the infrastructure, some of the content that you already have, and sort of take that and tweak it or update your instructional design process to say, okay, we have this thing, we need to make it for two audiences. So maybe that is something that you could look at. I would think that if you have a small team, I mean, we had a small team. You just really need to prioritize, if we're starting from scratch with partners, start from the beginning. What do they need? What are the areas that we can make the largest impact? Is there any like low hanging fruit to start tackling? So you can sort of piecemeal and just incrementally build on it. Obviously, like there's lots of different, AI tools and different things that you could probably use to be a little bit more efficient. Back 12 years ago, we didn't have any of that. So we were just trying to crank it out. But yeah, I think those are probably some of the things that I would think about as you start building up.
I think that's a good. And Mary, I'll find you. Someone wrote a blog for us recently on repurposing training content across audiences and then how to think about like breaking it down into what is that core component that's relevant across audiences. And then maybe I frame it a little differently.
Yeah.
Right. Brian said you mentioned creating certifications as part of your overall program. Were these legally defensible? So you worked with a psychometrician or more certification name only? Okay, who to work with? Okay, so I think you just shook your head. So I don't think.
Yeah, no, they weren't legally defensible. They were, alarm.com certification. It was basically, introductory foundational level of like, you're alarm.com certified because you've been through this program. We basically had a lot of modules per different product area, teaching them about the tools that we had to offer. And then at the end, they would take an exam and then we would sort of stamp them as being certified. We had a fulfillment process. We sent a beautiful fulfillment kit. So they really felt part of like that community, advocacy, all the things that you can do to make people feel really special, excited about, getting the certification and passing it and everything. So that was our process. In the way that we built it, I mean, we partnered with our product teams and sales and marketing in order to figure out where do we want to focus this? Do we want to cover every single product that we have? Do we want to pick the core products? How do we actually want to execute that? And so that's what we did, but it wasn't like a legally defensible situation.
Yeah, which I think is, there's a time and a place for that. And then there's a time when you do like a lower C certification and there's still value in that because it's still structured, formalized learning.
Yeah.
You're still assessing and doing knowledge checks.
Exactly.
All right. Question. How did you start monetizing your program and how did you approach that? So it sounds like that was maybe not an early days initiative. It came over time. So how did that come about?
Much later, much later. So much like, I mean, everything was like included when you were a partner, all of the partner services. That was, the culture. We didn't charge. We want our partners to be successful. So we're not going to charge anything, which was fine. over time, we said, we're doing a lot of custom training. We're spending a lot of time doing XYZ. The needs have sort of changed and developed over time. So for us, the monetization, we started going, maybe we could, just not necessarily be like super revenue driving, but like we could just make some money back into our budget, right? And so because we're doing all these like specialized customized things, and so the first thing was I thought, all right, let's try to figure out how we can monetize, doing some custom training or custom content development. Some of our partners had their own training teams, and so I was thinking, how could we, help them so we can make custom content and they could deploy it. So there was a lot of different ways that we were thinking about monetizing, but our overall offering was free. It was included in being a partner. The only other thing that we did was that I said, let's try something totally different. And I came up with an idea to do a experiential gamified conference, which was the goal of this was to invite people in that were like on the ground, sort of, technicians, salespeople, support folks, people doing the jobs in these partners' businesses so that they would get super hands-on. They would have this unbelievable experience. It's, really doing the job at the conference. That's how we were training them so that when they left, they're ready. They can like hit the ground running and do exactly that. So that we decided to charge for because it was such a big undertaking. The picture I had on my first slide, there's a picture of me celebrating because this was like the biggest thing that we had done. So we charged for, there it is. Picture of me. Power Up was our first and only monetized event. And we invited in, all of these big partners, executed this phenomenal event. So we were charging, just a fraction, honestly, of what other people charge for these in-person events and conferences. But it proved another point. People were willing to pay for what we had to offer them. And that was a massive win for the team. We weren't making any money from this, but it was proving value. It was building advocacy. Everybody would come and say, we love meeting your team. We love learning more about alarm.com. And we feel now so much more prepared to do our jobs. And that is a win. So we had the portfolio of educational services that we did come up with to monetize. And then we had this event.
I like that you got creative, but also didn't monetize everything. Cause I think sometimes we want to monetize something so that we don't get perceived as a cost center, but there's pros and cons, right? I know some of our customers used to charge for things and then just went to a totally free model because they realized that was actually like more beneficial for their customers. They didn't want to create a hurdle to adoption.
Exactly. You don't want to have a barrier to people getting set up with the foundational things that they need to be successful. So I was thinking about it more as like the extras, right? Like customized stuff, or we're coming on site and a lot of people have to travel there. There's additional content that we have to create. So it's sort of like a different realm of things. It was more like services, that we could put together.
Sure. All right. Katie is asking about how did you structure the partner content in your LMS? So did you spin up your own LMS? Did you use an existing LMS? So did you create a separate site or was it incorporated into the product training content?
So we had, we had an LMS that was just for partners. Internally, we had a separate one. So everything was loaded into our partner LMS. I didn't run all of the content in there. So I'm like, oh, we put it in there. I don't know what else. Everything was in our LMS. That's pretty much where it was. We had it, our LMS was listed into was a part of our partner portal. We also integrated so that you could access our knowledge base from there, but all of that content was, it was in the LMS itself.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's people are trying to figure out, is it all in one place? And then it's just kind of segmented based on. Yeah.
So like inside the LMS, like everything, had categories for, the different products that we had or the different types. Are you a commercial partner or residential? So we tried to slice and dice it so it's easy for people to figure out what they should take or by their role as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. I realized we never officially transitioned into started taking questions. So if folks have other questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. We have a few minutes here. But I would also encourage you too, right, to rate the session underneath before you leave, please. Like, as people in the education sphere, we want your feedback. I want to know, what did you like? What did you learn? And then what else do you want to hear about? What questions do you have, right? So this series is for you. We want to help you out there. I'm going to give it a second because as soon as I say there are no questions, that one was in the middle of being typed. So we'll give it a second, and my dog's going to yawn in the background. I don't know if you can hear that.
That was your dog? I don't know what that was.
That was big yawn.
We need more cat content while we wait. Where's the cat?
I know. Where did he go? He was sitting over here the whole time. It was like he knew that cats were supposed to be like in the peripheral of this webinar. Okay, I don't see that anybody hit enter on their questions, so we may have answered all the questions already. So in that case, Katie, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your experience. I think it's so helpful just to hear what other people have been through, right? We learn from the people who have gone before us. And then thank you everybody who joined us today, asked some great questions. Yeah, and I guess we will see you. We host these webinars every month. So like we'll see you on the next one. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. And feel free to reach out to me if anyone wants to talk to me. I'm happy to chat about anything that you have going on. So don't be a stranger.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Bye.
Thank you.